What is poppin'? It is a Slaptain. I am but a lowly Slaptain riding these ReFi waves, and this week in ReFi, where we give you all the ReFi news that is fit to go ape wild over. Of course, with me is the man with the plan, the man with the winter tan, the Estonian madman, the man of the hour, the man with the power, the man who's so sweet he's never sour, the leader of the Regenerative Finance Vanguard, Sir Rez.
Hello, it's me. It's been a week. We are back. And as promised by the name of the podcast, this is another This Week in ReFi.
But you're on the wrong side now because now you're on the right side of the screen before you're on the left side of the screen. So
Mm.
what happened?
Well, we're trying out some new editing, I think. We're gonna see how well this turns out. For the viewers, for the listeners, leave comments. Tell us what are your preferences. We are trying out some different editing this time.
Should be adventurous.
Very adventurous. Especially
Eh,
the coming very close to a microphone and going far away things.
Yeah, this is part of our new aesthetic. It's like an immersive experience. Well, we're going to immerse you in knowledge today. We're going to give you some ReFi news. We're going to give you some non-ReFi news. We may even get into a little bit of methodological analysis if we're feeling a little feisty, and I think Rez is.
Yes.
Cool. How do you feel about launches, Rez?
Launches are dope. I love launches, especially in this market. I mean, it's not like we see launches every day, Slapton.
No, we certainly do not. I don't think I remember the last significant launch we've seen, actually. This is the winter, the crypto winter. Yeah, launches are good. Rocket launches are good. Project launches are good. If you have launch with your friend and like a picnic, that's good. Little play on words there. And so what we're referring to, of course, is Ecosapiens. Ecosapiens, they've
Yes.
launched. There's blast off. Here we go. So we've talked about Ecosapiens before, haven't we? I think their
Yeah.
didn't they have like an NFT round and it was the
hmm
funny NFT of the guy, the yellow man, uh, interacting with the world. Was that
Oh,
Ecosapien?
no. That was
No,
Flow
my bad.
Carbon's
That was Solar
flowers.
Carbon. I
Yes,
apologize.
yes, yes.
Flowers.
Uh, So, what are Ecosapiens NFTs are essentially these statue looking dudes that are getting cooler and cooler over time as you retire more carbon into them. So, they start out essentially, I think, all looking like these, but the potential future of these, as Ecosapiens has advertised it before, is that they are going to become progressively cooler and cooler the more carbon goes in. And they launched essentially this week, since prior to this week, there was just these chrysalis things that well, they all looked the same, and now finally, the people that own the chrysalis could put some money in to make them into real level one ecosapiens.
I can't wait to see how these things evolve, man.
I think the header is this kind of, reference to how this is gonna play out over time, but I'm
Yeah.
pretty excited.
And I think the final level is like this. This is speculation. So you start with the basic guy, then you get some like growth, and you get some flowers, and then at the end, like if you hit the most that you can hit, it'll just be a picture of you, Rez. It'll just be you.
Oh, it'll be a picture of like a nice Persian carpet. Somebody still needs to do the rug NFT collection, the one where everybody gets pictures of Persian carpets, but the last person just gets their wallets drained and the empty picture.
Well, this is this not going to happen, Ecosapiens, but yes,
Mhm.
this is lovely to see. Congrats to the Ecosapien folks. Love to see it, man. Always good to build in the bear, as they say. Are we in a bear? I think we're in a bear.
Oh, we're in like a triple bear right now. It's
We're in a
a it's a
triple bear.
it's a bear. So in like a very macro sense, we're in a bear. In a crypto sense, we're in a winter, which is also a bear. And then in the carbon sense, the drama just never ends. So we're having really, really a bad mix of all of the possible bears you could have at the same time.
Love it. Well, let's get into some of the carbon and drama, as you said. Not necessarily always drama, but information.
Yes. So, as the first piece of information, which I think both me and Slapton have been waiting for such a long time, and we both knew that this was definitely coming out a lot sooner than the whole Verra thing. Gold Standard is moving forward. They finished their consultation. We had a look at it previously on this podcast. And they have now announced that they have a couple of partners who they will be consulting in order to get into readiness phase. So things are happening. There's piloting. There's gonna be like some carbon on chain soon, and I'm excited about that.
Love it, dude. Yeah. So gold standard, we've said this a million times. Like if there was an opportunity for gold standard to emerge from the penumbra, from the shadow of Verra, this was the perfect opportunity. And it looks like they could be capitalizing. So Verra doesn't look to be in any hurry to do much of anything, both
Yeah.
publicly and privately. We've heard things of this nature. And so Gold Standard, which I've referred to as the second banana, which is a
Mm-hmm.
professional wrestling term to Verra, can now be the first banana, at least in the tokenized carbon world. And all they really have to do is something.
Yeah.
That's it. All they have to do is something. Doesn't even have to be really good. Just do something in a reasonable time frame and communicate
Mm-hmm.
reasonably well, and they're going to gain some of this market share. Love to see it. This is why we need competition. Let's go all in gold standard, not financial advice.
Yes, huge fan. Gold Standard keeps shipping, keeps doing things. We hear from them every couple of months, and the news feels good every time. I love that feeling.
What
And
do you think? What do you think is going to be the actual consequence of this? Do you think we'll see something in the next 2 or 3 months that'll actually be tangible that we can interact with, or it will just be more like framework setting?
hmm, good question. I think we're now nearing these phases where we should start seeing things happening in the coming months. So I would be very surprised if we finished this year and we didn't already have a flourishing gold standard based on-chain carbon ecosystem.
Yeah. Could you imagine if they just take the plunge and have like a registry that's natively on chain?
Hmm. There are a couple of them out already, technically. I
Mhm,
think you could point to our friends over at Regen Network
mhm,
as being an example of a fully on chain from the
mhm.
start carbon registry. But definitely seeing a larger registry with a huge amount of existing demand coming on chain, that is also like really transformational.
Yeah, that would change the entire landscape like immediately. I feel like so. There you go, gold standard. That's all you have to do. Just do
All
that.
you have to do, just ask questions, keep things moving forward. Everybody likes you.
Gold standard is the best.
Not sponsored by Gold Standard.
Not sponsored by
But
Gold
you know,
Standard.
if Gold Standard wanted to reach out,
Yeah,
yeah,
if Gold Standard wanted to speak with us, I wouldn't say no. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? Hey, this is
hmm
good news. All right, great. So
yeah.
we start off with some good news. Can we keep the good? Here's the question, Rez. Can we keep the good news going?
We can keep the good news going because even though I said we were in like a triple bear market right now, it feels like there are some pieces of very good news coming out constantly. And here's the next one. So this is about Puro Earth. What can we say about Puro Earth, Slaptain?
We can say a lot about Puro Earth, and we can say a lot about the recent news that they are the first durable carbon removal standard to obtain ICROA endorsement. And my favorite thing is all the acronyms because this space is littered with acronyms.
Mm-hmm.
ICROA, Rez, go.
Uh, oh, give- uh, yeah, that's what it was. International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance. This is what ICROA is. So,
They did not account for the word and in their acronym. It should be ICROAOA, and they did not put the A in there. And
yes,
someone needs to say something to them.
or like an and character in the middle of your acronym. That also works really well. But ICROA, why is this relevant? Is because ICROA is a very important organization in the space in terms of signaling that hey, this registry makes sense, people should use this registry, good quality stuff comes from here, so hey, why not buy from here, right? Because when you are this sort of end consumer, when you are, let's say, a corporate and you're looking at an alternative registry selling you carbon credits, it's often really hard to justify to your leadership that hey, these carbon credits are perfectly legit, I swear we should buy these instead.
Right.
And what ICROA does is that it's a sort of stamp of approval that the carbon space accepts that these are serious players and you should buy supply from them. And it takes a while.
Yeah, and it comes down to the cost of going outside of a larger, more dominant registry, right? There's the
Hmm.
reputational risk that you
Hmm.
run in dabbling in this. And we've talked about this before. Is like, well, what's the benefit of doing that versus what's the cost? And the benefit is like, well, you did what you could have done somewhere else with the potential risk of looking like a, pardon my French, idiot. Is that a French word? I think so. I think it's German. Um, if you took on that risk of going to a lesser vetted or lesser known registry, right? This is good. I mean, it's
Hmm.
good to have options as we've discussed in the past, and it's great to see something like Puro, which, hey, from your neck of the woods, my understanding, right?
Hmm.
Finish
Yes, Finnish. So I believe Puro people, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the correct pronunciation of Puro is Puro. Uh,
Puro.
Puro, yes.
What does that mean?
Uh, I guess it
That's
means
Finnish for rug. I'm joking.
Finnish for rock.
Could you imagine? It just sounds like pure. And all the English speakers went, "Yeah, it looks good."
Yeah, it's all right. But
Yeah.
yeah, these folks, why are they important? Is because they do removal carbon credits.
Mm,
So what they focus on is more of this high tech stuff, so like advanced mineral weathering, direct air capture, biochar, a bunch of these methodologies where you're actually doing something super actively in order to generate these carbon credits. So they
mm,
have an activity associated with them. There's some outputs, there's some storage, there's some good old pulling stuff out of the air and making it not go back into the air happening
right.
here. And I love that.
Perfectly said. Nice. So two good stories in a
Hmm.
row.
Slapton, do you
Mhm.
remember when you mentioned that, hey, if you buy some carbon credits and it turns out that they're not that good, then you'll look dumb, right?
Yes, I
So
remember when I said that.
last episode, we talked about one of these situations where a Papua New Guinea Red Plus project turned out to be extremely problematic, and then there was a whole 1 hour documentary about how these carbon credits are very bad and
Right.
nobody should buy them, and also that the Sydney Opera House is somehow also very implicated in buying credits from this organization, and honestly, we should all shame Sydney Opera House for even trying, right? Um,
Right. No one should take in any opera throughout the world until Sydney Opera House gets its act together with its carbon accounting. 100%. Yes, I remember that.
Exactly. So, as a follow up to this same project, sadly, the article is pay gated. So, if you want to go and pay Carbon Pulse money, you can read the whole underlying article yourself. But this specific project has now gone from having an AA plus rating in B0, which is considered to
Yes.
be very good, much better than
Mhm.
most carbon credits, right? They went all the way down to an A, which is B0's lowest rating, which you
Oof.
can't go below. It's
Oof.
essentially terrible. Do not buy this. This is the kind of quality that has now been established for these sorts of carbon credits.
So here's the first question: is this good news, or is this not good news? Because you can interpret it one of two ways. Good news because BeZero is taking appropriate actions to downgrade the quality of the project, or is it bad news because they had to do this and to some level this verifies what the Guardian article and you and I have been saying about some Red Plus projects.
I think, yeah, Red Plus is this insanely complicated category to get right because for some reason there's just a lot of ways to play around with the accounting to make it look like you did infinite carbon credits and that
Mhm.
everybody should pay you. The other challenge here, I think, is as B0. Now, if the audience doesn't remember, BeZero is a carbon ratings agency. So what they do is that they look at it with this question of how likely is this to be a good carbon project? How likely is it that the emissions are actually avoided, that something happens on the ground? Does this feel like a real carbon credit or is this more of like a carbon credit, right? Because we need this second layer of fact checking because getting on a registry and getting a certified carbon credit seemingly just isn't enough because the standards are not high enough for most buyers.
Mm. Right. Basically, it's a third party that verifies
The
the
work of multiple previous parties that should be there to create quality outputs.
If you ever wonder why this space is opaque and not entirely accessible, I think the last explanation would be like a good place to start. Okay, so there's these verification bodies that need to verify, and their scale is from A to A plus, where A is execrable. Like there you go. Have fun.
Have fun.
Now you're in the carbon world. You
Yeah.
know.
I still imagine this one interaction that has to have happened where, let's say, a carbon trading house with mm, less good faith approach to selling their carbon credits might go up to a potential end buyer and say, "Hey, do you want this? Do you want this fantastic Red Plus? It's rated A by
A.
BeZero. It's very good.
Yeah.
It has a
You
A.
remember school, right? You remember school. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You remember how A was a really good grade? Well,
Mhm.
we've got all of it.
All of the
We
A's. There's a
There's an
fire
A.
sale. There's a fire sale on Ace right now. Buy
Yeah.
one get one free. Let's go. whatever,
Yeah.
whatever you need. These have A ratings. We swear they're good. That's what A
We
means.
wouldn't sell a B to you. We wouldn't sell a B plus and A minus. We have A's for days. That's actually
A's
a
for
really
days.
good. That's a really good pitch right there.
Oh yeah, that's the low quality carbon broker. I have A's for
Yeah.
days.
Is there there needs to be that like the stereotypical like sleazy 80s businessman who shows up in like the cheap suit and the tie that's like undone. We need that version in the carbon world who's like going around being like A's for days, baby. I got A's for you know what I mean? Like
Hey.
cigar coming out of his mouth.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um
exactly. The second interesting thing that this article internally mentioned was, if we remember from last week, this specific project, the Night project in Papua New Guinea,
mhm.
the project proponents' Verra registry account got frozen.
Mhm.
So they couldn't move credits in and out. There was an ongoing investigation of what's happening. And this week it looks like they have unlocked the registry account. So that's interesting.
And I wonder
Uh,
if there's a correlation, right, between that and
hmm.
perhaps the downgrading. I mean, I'm not saying that is the case. I just wonder. Like, it just seems like I
But
don't know.
it does seem interesting of like
Yeah,
what led to the unlocking to begin with, because
that's what I'm
based
saying. Yeah,
on the available public information, it doesn't seem like that should have happened. So perhaps there are some facts we are not aware of.
I'm sure there are.
Yeah,
There,
probably.
there are always facts we are unaware of. Um, cool. So Puro was good news, and then
Hmm.
we had two good newses, right? We had Puro good news,
Hmm.
we had Ecosapiens good news. This is up in the air whether this is good news, but I think the next story we can say is not good news,
Oh yeah, it's 100% not stonks.
not stunks.
Yes.
Rez, how do you feel about taking away banking access to crypto space as a way of regulatory, I don't know how you say this, like gravity.
Mm. Yeah, as we discussed last week in the section about Operation Choke Point 2.0, this
Hmm.
is a very similar situation we're in. This is a form of how Operation Choke Point 2.0 seems to be playing out. Silvergate, the organization that is charged with assisting FTX and Alameda in doing bad things to customer funds, uh, they have been sued for this. There's an ongoing investigation. And additionally, now they have stopped providing institutions this core infrastructure that a bunch of exchanges use to move money through the traditional banking system, which is not great. It's absolutely not great. This is about as terrible as it gets. It keeps getting worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So choke point was this idea that regulatory bodies in the US could essentially choke out certain industries that they felt were problematic by removing infrastructure, particularly economic, financial infrastructure like banks, right? So if you can't pay somebody, if an industry can't get paid through our traditional means, they can't operate. And so it seems to be an effort right now by regulatory bodies in the U.S. in particular
Hmm.
that are removing this financial infrastructure so that the crypto space. I don't know what the end goal is, to destroy it, to force it closer to what it wants it to be. Like I don't know, um, but I don't think they know either. To be perfectly honest, I don't think like the SEC has any idea of what they actually want to do with crypto. Um,
I get the impression that the SEC just wants crypto to go away.
It feels well, it feels that way. Like by their actions, it feels that way. You can make an argument that maybe they want it to go away in its current form and then come back, or to reform in a form that's more friendly to it in the government
Mhm.
interest. There's a lot of different ways to think about it, a lot of different conspiracies, but at the end of the day, that just makes it harder for crypto to operate in the United States. And you and I were sharing off air that already we're seeing movement personally to Europe and non-US countries, which is the inevitable consequence of doing this, right? And
Yeah.
even you have experience with at Solid World with the challenges of US regulation, and
Mhm.
a lot of people in the carbon space have problems with US regulation, and the solution often is to just avoid.
Yeah. The whole thing about the US currently is that if you breathe on anything on a blockchain, it's a security. And
Right.
securities involve a lot of reporting requirements. And the most fun part is that even if you wanted to, you couldn't comply with the reporting requirements
Yeah.
because, haha, every time you do even small updates, you have to re register. So there is no necessarily good way to become a registered crypto security at this point, even if you wanted to.
Right. So then the ultimate question is like, how does this resolve? Or maybe the better one is, does it resolve? What do you think?
I think it's going to play out in a way that it gets worse. It gets progressively worse, and people start getting more and more annoyed at the SEC for
Mhm.
doing this. And I think there's going to be a lot more business pressure towards the lawmaking part of the government to actually get the SEC in check and force them to put out some reasonable guidelines. But the problem, I think, big picture, is that with how divided the US government is right now,
Mhm.
there doesn't seem to be a clear pathway of these things happening in the next 2 years in
Yeah.
normal speed.
Yeah, everything is politicized to the nth degree.
Hmm.
Every topic is an opportunity for one side of the political spectrum to demonize the other side and champion themselves. And that's certainly not unique to crypto, but I think
But
you're
yeah,
right.
I think we're like just slowly observing the center of gravity uh, move away from the US when it comes to crypto. The center of gravity is going to inevitably go to places that have guidelines, that have regulations, that make people
Yeah.
feel safe, that make people feel like there is some sort of a set of rules they could follow and things start
Right.
making sense.
Right.
Because if you try and operate out of a country where asking for help can end up getting you
Yeah.
sued instead of getting you information, that's not a great place to be in.
100%. So not good news all around, but hey, it
Not stonks, yeah.
can't all be good news. Similarly, um, I guess if you're holding anything in Binance, this may not be good news as well. And
Yes,
it's similar, right? Go ahead.
yeah. As a final piece of Binance fun is, well, last article we saw that Binance is getting investigated because they're essentially operating an unregistered securities exchange, according to the SEC.
Hmm.
This one is a pretty sketchy thing that has been happening in the background at Binance as well. So the content of this story is that Binance at some point moved their b-USDC token collateral. So b-USDC is a sort of Binance custodied USDC, which then circulates on chain, right? So there is some collateral in the form of USDC that's actually backing it, and you can go with your b-USDC and you could get some actual USDC, right? That's the
Hmm.
logic here. It's a receipt. Now, normally, when you bridge these kind of assets, the collateral is locked because otherwise you end up in this really weird situation where your money isn't actually backed by anything, it's air. And that generally we've seen when bridges get hacked, uh, the uh, the tokens on the other side of where the assets ended up getting bridged to, all of these
Hmm.
vouchers, they become functionally worthless because you can't redeem them for the real thing anymore.
Hmm.
Um, Binance seems to have shuffled about $1.8 billion dollars in the background of Circulus USDC. And according to the reporting that is out there right now, this money seems to have been sent to a bunch of hedge funds and trading firms that operate in crypto, surprisingly, including Alameda Research. Uh, and Then this money, this USDC, was taken out and then deposited back as fiat into b-USD, which is Binance's own branded stablecoin, right? So they got to capture all of this nice yield on the short-term government debt that usually backs stablecoins. So yields are pretty good now. Having more money, having like $1 billion in your stablecoin, while in the background you get to harvest all of this beautiful, beautiful percent risk-free interest rate, does feel very good.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that what I'm thinking about is you have the last story, and obviously the SEC is coming down. We would probably say too heavy-handed, but
Hmm.
they've been given the opportunity over and over to justify their heavy-handedness with irresponsible action and outright criminality. I'm not saying that this is, but certainly we can say there have been. I've said it from the beginning. If you want regulation and you want government intrusion into the space, keep doing what you're doing, and that was a collective warning to everybody in this space. It's just unfortunate. It's like a classic example of a few bad actors or whatever you want to say can spoil it for everybody, right? But it becomes hard to then say that the SEC is necessarily the bad guy or the bad person
Hmm.
when you have so much of this going on, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of clown world where not anybody is necessarily in very good faith, including the SEC, but also including a bunch of these crypto organizations. It's a hard space to navigate, even ethically, when it does seem like in many of these areas, regulation is needed, right? Uh,
Hmm.
if you have unchecked ability to remove collateral from a
Hmm.
smart contract, then maybe you're providing some sort of a financial service at that point.
hundred
Just,
percent. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's a centralized financial service. 100%. You can't claim it's decentralized anymore if you have a backdoor to the funds, right?
Yeah,
That you,
if you can just go in and take out the money and spend it or move it
yeah.
around like you want to, that's a sort of like fund management at that point.
Yeah.
Even not on behalf of the depositors in this case, because it's not like the depositors are earning yield from any of this. They
Right.
just have their stable coins, and you are in the background risking the stability of a stable coin.
Right. There you go. So always something afoot in the crypto world. Always something to report on.
Yes, as a reminder, if you do not self custody your funds, you probably should. So, in general, we maintain this recommendation that do not keep your money in centralized exchanges for longer than you need to. It can end badly, and there's a lot of historical precedent at this point of this ending badly. So, just avoid it. You'll be happier for it. Get a ledger, get a Trezor, get a something hardware wallet, and it's a lot more secure because not your keys, not your crypto. As long as you have it on an exchange, it's not your crypto.
That's it. Well said. Well, we've done the crypto thing. We've done the refi news. Should we get into some relatively nerdy education on soil carbon? How do you feel?
Yeah,
We up for it?
sounds good. So we anticipate that in this bear market, we're going to be seeing not that much news on a weekly basis, and we figured that we would invest some time into educating our audience about interesting topics around carbon, refi, and the first topic we've selected right now is soil carbon because we're working up towards some spicy stuff in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, this is going to be like a Scoville meter that measures the spiciness. So we're going to be
Mm.
at like jalapeno. Eventually, we're going to get up to Carolina Reaper, but we will get there. Let me play the role because this is accurate of the less knowledgeable participant in this conversation. And let me pose this question to you, Sir Rez. What
Mhm.
is soil carbon?
So on a very high level, we have a bunch of different options for generating carbon credits, right? We can plant new forests. We could have cool machines that suck carbon directly out of the air. We can have a bunch of different options for how exactly we're generating carbon credits. Soil carbon credits are one of these options.
Mhm.
Now, what do you get carbon credits for? You get carbon credits for the soil having increased amounts of carbon in it, whereas you would essentially be paying, for example, a farmer to make their soils better. Very positive net good, if
Mhm.
you think about it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to elaborate on that. So when you say there's carbon in soil, what does that take the form of? What does that actually mean?
It means generally plant matter. So let's say you're a farmer, right? And you grow wheat on your fields. Now, when you're growing wheat, you take off the nice ends, but you leave the rest of the plant mass actually just on the field to degrade. That's what becomes soil. You incorporate it into the soil, it starts breaking down. This is going to be a piece of your next year's soil now. So you
Mhm.
just keep putting in more plant matter, also the roots of previous plants that have, for example, been on crop fields. The roots obviously start breaking down once the crop gets harvested. So there are a couple of different options for in crop farming. You might be putting organic matter back into the ground. This also can take the form of animal excrement on your fields because, shit is very close to soil already. If you incorporate it, that's just more organic mass that you have in your fields. It's more nutrients. It's generally good for crops.
So there you have it, everybody at home. When you eat a tomato, it came from the soil. The soil came from a cow's butt. You are essentially eating a cow's butt. And that's called the law of syllogisms. That's
Makes
logic
sense.
right there. Yeah,
Yeah,
there you
good
go.
logic. Very,
Thank
very
you.
good logic.
All right, so that's good background. All right, so soil carbon is not relatively popular. Is that a fair statement, or prevalent? I should say. Like
Yeah,
it, it's popular.
I would say there's basically no soil carbon credits in existence,
Mm,
unlike major registries.
right. Then
There's a small amount. There is a
mhm.
small amount, but
Yeah,
it's not a huge amount. And
right.
then, yeah,
Like if you were to give a breakdown of like most, like it, to give a scope of that, like how much, and you could obviously guess. I don't want to put you on the spot, but like how much soil carbon is there on these major registries compared to like Red Plus as like a percentage?
less than 1%.
Okay, so relatively rare. And then the question it begs is, why is there not a lot of soil carbon on these major registries?
All right. So this is the most fascinating issue around soil carbon because on paper it looks like it should be relatively easy to do. You go to a farmer and you say, hey, you're keeping your soil bare for 2 months in a year. Why don't you plant a small crop that then just covers the ground, get some biomass? By the time you want to plant your next crop, you just plow it into the ground again. Everything seems to make sense so
Mhm,
far, right? So
mhm,
we just need to compensate the farmer for this small activity happening in this farmer's general life cycle.
mhm.
The problem actually ends up being carbon methodologies themselves.
Right.
So, as we've talked before, there are generally three major, very important things you have to keep in mind when it comes to any carbon credits. This is additionality, its permanence, and its leakage, right? Now, when we're talking about additionality, additionality means that if I didn't give you these carbon credits, this thing wouldn't have happened. Um, And what makes soil carbon very challenging around this is farmers already do a bunch of things on their fields,
Right.
right?
So
There's
they're getting punished for having taken the right actions in the past, right? To some degree.
Yeah, they can be. So if you're already a farmer doing all of these like fantastic practices and you have changed nothing for this carbon project, that becomes very problematic very fast, right? Because
Mhm,
we are now just awarding farmers for doing what they already have been doing. It doesn't create net change.
mhm,
There's no behavior change involved. But when we want to establish that there's some sort of behavior change, here's where it gets really complicated
mhm,
because we would need literally like 5 years of behavioral logs from this farmer to establish that yes, this person generally doesn't do this practice. Here are the practices this person does do. And we get into a whole lot of data just trying to figure out what is average behavior for
mhm.
this specific farmer. The second element of it is that you need to do it at scale. So if we're talking about Verra, for example, you can't register as like a 1,000 hectare farmer. It wouldn't make any sense. So you need to register 100,000 hectares of
Mhm.
farmland. But 100,000 hectares of farmland is owned by multiple people with all of their different practices and the way they store their data and a bunch of this stuff.
And
So
that comes down to the complexity, cost, and time of going through the process of something like Vera,
yes,
their process, right? So
hmm
that's why you don't see people that have an half an acre outside in their backyard going to Vera, which is
yeah,
what our friends at Regen were doing, right? That was kind of their
Yeah, I don't know what the current state of these projects are, but they tried out to do soil carbon with 3 different farms, and they were doing this sort of improved land management
Hmm.
by doing, I think, more strategic cattle grazing on their
Hmm.
fields.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is, I think, a bit easier to standardize also than, for example, crop farming, where you might be growing different crops on
Right.
different parts of the year. Your practices might differ from year to year. If you are just doing cattle grazing on grasslands, it's a bit easier to figure out how that is supposed to work out.
Good. So sorry to interrupt, but so yeah, it has a challenge of scale. And what are the other challenges facing soil carbon currently?
So yeah, so one of them is the organizations and the people who actually implement the practices. They aren't necessarily individually that big to do the project. That's why we mentioned scale is really important.
Hmm.
The second thing is we actually need to measure the soil at some point,
Hmm.
right? We need to understand that there's been some sort of a change in the soil. We need to establish some sort of a baseline. And the current reality is that if you do soil testing, soils themselves are so highly varied in how much organic carbon you're measuring in any specific part of the field, that you need to do a bunch of soil tests to actually establish a baseline.
Hmm.
And this ends up being incredibly expensive. This is one of the most major challenges in soil carbon. The MRV part of it is very expensive. Just figuring out how much soil organic carbon we currently have, it's not an easy question to answer. It's very expensive. And then, as a follow up, some people say something like, hey, why don't you just do this with satellites, right?
Right.
Because we can have nice satellite images, we can look at the field, we can make some guesses. The issue there is satellite imagery isn't necessarily very high resolution. And even when it is, images of even the top layer of the
Hmm.
soil don't necessarily answer the question of what's happening 30 centimeters below the top layer of the soil.
Right. So you have a reporting verification measuring issue with soil carbon that's significant. All right, so it has to do with scale. It has to do with establishing a baseline, right? We have to have established a baseline that this wouldn't be happening already. It's
Mhm,
a lengthy baseline. There's a lot of reporting going on there. What about in terms of like, let's say that you did all of these things properly, that you
mhm,
have established for 5 years that you weren't doing a practice, and so this is like already the first question I would have is like there seems to be a perverse incentive there.
there is. I
So
actually agree, yeah.
yeah, so if you have to establish, let's say for 5 years you haven't been doing this, but you were made aware of it 5 years ago, you
Mhm.
may say, all right, I won't do it for 5 years, establish that I wasn't doing it, as opposed to I know I wasn't doing it for the last 20 years. Now I'm aware of it. Let me do it now and get my credits. Right.
Yeah.
So I would say like that's a perverse incentive to prove you weren't doing it and prove that you weren't doing it for a long time, which is its whole other thing. But let's say
Mhm.
you do all this. What about in terms of getting the credits, the timeline of the issuance?
Oh, here's another cool, not cool thing about soil carbon. So when we're talking about a single small piece of land, uh, what do you think a hectare of soil might contain in terms of tons of carbon?
First of all, speak in freedom units where acres, no, what is a hectare? Hectare is like
I
half an acre, I
what?
think.
Let's see, hectare to acre. So one
You
hectare is 2.4
it
acres.
was completely the wrong way around.
Hmm.
Um how many tons are in and so how far deep are we going in this hectare? What's the
Let's
depth of
say
it?
50 centimeters, for example.
How many tons? I would say 20,000 tons.
Uh, Actually, it's more like 60 to 120
Yeah, it's a lot.
thousand tons.
Yeah.
Uh, just in the topsoil. So you end up with this situation where there's already a bunch of carbon
Mhm.
on the fields, right? Now the average improvement, if you did all of the right things and you put in a lot of effort to make sure you know these activities got done, what you might be seeing on a per year basis is less than 1 ton.
Mhm.
So if we are talking about 80 tons or 100 tons already being there and you being able to add less than 1 ton onto a field,
Mhm.
uh, over a couple of years, the change will end up being maybe like a 5% improvement, right?
Right.
So it's very hard to make that show up on measurements, is already a big challenge. The
Mhm.
second challenge is soil carbon is a sort of active, it's a more alive version of carbon, meaning that you end up having some soil carbon, or sorry, some organic matter come in, you end up seeing it break down, and then it releases a CO2 on the other side again. So it's, this circle of life
Mhm.
happening inside the soil. The challenge around that is that if you do a practice for 1 year and don't do it the next year, it's not necessarily obvious that your soil organic carbon levels
Right.
will keep going up. It just might degrade, right? There's an equilibrium. There's an in and out. There's a sort of place where you end up, but it doesn't necessarily keep going up forever or keep going down forever.
Yeah, so like opposed
So,
to and to give context, like if you plant a tree, the
mhm,
assumption is as long as there isn't a catastrophic event like a forest fire, that tree will grow in perpetuity and it will, the amount of carbon that is captured will just grow. If you aren't actively managing these soils,
yes.
there is a possibility that all of the work that was done was gets undone relatively quickly.
Yeah, exactly. There is always this risk of heightened risk of reversing,
Mhm.
and all of these things end up in a situation where it might take you, let's say, 4 or 5 years to establish enough
Mhm.
change, to establish enough activity that it's worth going to uh, uh, a carbon registry and getting yourself validated and getting all of the processes done
Mhm.
to get you carbon credits finally.
Mhm.
Which is a pretty crazy equation now that you think about it, right? So you have all of this high amount of data collection, high amount of education you have to do, high amount of everything. It's a kind of complicated carbon project.
Mhm.
And then on the other end, the timelines are quite long. So it requires a lot of patience. And the farmers aren't necessarily going to be the ones
Mhm.
paying for this either, because if you just went up to a farmer and told them, hey, why don't you work for 5 years and then you maybe get some money, maybe,
Right.
uh, this is the worst pitch ever, and I can tell you this from personal experience.
Have you tried
Not
it?
a good pitch. Having seen this part of the industry, you know, that's a very difficult pitch to make.
You just need to have the right, like, look, the 80s businessman, sleazy salesman. Hey, man, A's for days.
Ace for
All right,
days.
so we've talked about the challenge, and we're eventually going to get into. We're going to build on this. We just wanted to, in future episodes, I'm thinking. But so then, what's attractive about soil carbon? All these challenges are laid out. So the
Mhm.
question I'm thinking is like, why would anybody even bother?
Uh, there are a bunch of very good reasons to bother.
Hmm.
So the first and most obvious one is actually if you can figure out all of the components, if you can figure out how to industrialize this, how
Hmm.
to scale the actual process that's going to let you create carbon credits, this is possibly one of the most rapidly scalable
Hmm.
sources of emission remove or carbon removal that we could possibly do. It has a bunch of very good externalities. Higher carbon stocks in soils means that the soils are more fertile. This
Hmm.
is one of the good reasons. The other good reason is that it retains water better.
Hmm.
What does it mean that it retains water better? It means that when you have a drought, your crops won't fail as fast because
Hmm.
there will be more moisture in the soil propping up those crops. So it
Hmm.
actually improves food security for the whole region that you are raising soil organic carbon in. There are a bunch of very good reasons in a long perspective that you might want to have very good soils, and this makes it a interesting potential source of carbon credits,
Hmm.
because you can scale if you figure out all the other parts around. This is a scalable thing that generates results relatively fast. If you go around and try to do a lot of reforestation projects, it takes a long time for the reforestation projects to actually start generating larger amounts of carbon, because the small little saplings don't necessarily do much in their first couple of years. In soil carbon, when we're talking about improvements, we can even make improvements in a year, right? We could
Hmm.
put in an additional crop in the middle when the soil is bare. This is more biomass that's now going back into the soil. And because we just created more biomass out of thin air, literally, we are now in the situation where we have less carbon in the air and more carbon in the soil, and that's a net positive.
There you go. Yeah, it makes sense, man. Now, it's a good point. So maybe the pitch to these farmers is, hey, do you want to have better yield? Do you want to be more drought resistant? Oh, and by the way, if we do this for a number of years, there's a possibility that we're even going to be able to get you money for improving the quality of your soil through some carbon scheme. And I mean scheme in a very neutral sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So we've set the backdrop. I wonder what we're going to do with this backdrop, Res. Perhaps we can take a look at some methodologies that are out there, have been proposed to some registries, and see if how it actually plays out.
Hmm.
Might we do that? What do you think?
Yes, we are going to do that, and we are going to be looking at Verra methodologies around soil carbon, and we're eventually working up to even reading a real project's documentation and discussing why it's bad. Because I think this is a very great way to learn, at least personally.
Stay tuned. Spicy Res is the best Res. I can tell you from personal experience. He doesn't come out nearly as often as, let's say, Spicy Slaptain, but when he does, it's a joy. It's a treat. It's a treat for the senses, the intellect. So yeah, we'll do, I think, a format like this where we give you some news, and at the end we'll just do our education piece. And if you stick around, or if you're just interested in the news, that's cool. If you're just interested in the education piece, that's cool. Rez and I never say this because we're terrible salespeople, at least when it comes to this podcast. If you find any of this content interesting, we would appreciate a sub, a follow, anything on social media would be cool. A comment, let us know. Like, whatever. We're going to make the content one way or the other because we're psychopathically passionate about everything that we do. But it is nice for us to hear that the work is getting heard, or you can shape what we're doing by letting us know. Any final words, Rez?
Yes, send us good vibes. Good vibes mean more content, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, man. Good vibes to everybody. Also, um, remember to ape responsibly, would you? Peace, dudes and dudettes.